I'm now joined by CJ Nitkowski, former MLB pitcher, Emmy award-winning broadcaster for the Texas Rangers on Valley Sports Southwest and MLB Network radio host. CJ, thanks for the time and excited to have you.
Yeah, Corey, my pleasure, man. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Now, of course, this weekend is Father's Day. We dads love our adoration, but I think this is a great opportunity to talk about parenting, especially when it comes to parents in sports. You have the perspective, obviously, as someone who made a career out of playing, but also someone who can understand the pressures that can put on a child to live up to. Being the father of three kids, including one who's really just getting started in his sports endeavors, how have you approached being a sports parent?
Yeah, a little bit learning as I go, quite honestly, and seeing some things that I think a lot of former professional athletes will tell you that kind of caught me by surprise, and some of the coaching and some of the parenting and the intensity compared to how it was when I was coming up as a kid and playing Little League. I grew up in the Northeast, so doing that in the 80s wasn't nearly what we get down here in Georgia now. And so raising a couple of boys and going through Georgia amateur baseball in the Atlanta area was certainly a little bit different. That one caught me, like I said, by surprise. And so trying to manage that, manage expectations, making sure that you're not putting too much pressure on your kids. Even I had to learn a little bit about that and had the opportunity to coach them both a few different times along the way. And it's trial and error. But I will tell you that I think ultimately the thing that I get concerned about most for parents is when they just get a little bit too intense, putting too much on kids when they're young, and forgetting that they first have to fall in love with the game. You can't even make them love it. See if they love it. Give them the opportunity to love it, and then you go from there.
Yeah, obviously some great jumping off points there, but how have you avoided your kids trying to live up to those external expectations that come with, being the child of a former first round pick, a 10-year pro? Were there and do there continues to be conversations about not trying to live up to dad's baseball reference page?
100%. And I think part of it for me was also the fact that I was a late bloomer. I had to tell my oldest when I sat here and watched him playing. He's 21 years old now. But when he was playing when he was younger and seeing how good these kids were, I said, listen, I would not have been able to play on that really good travel team that you're talking about over there. I wouldn't have. I was an average high school player at best and really didn't blossom until I'd gotten to college. So I always tried to minimize the expectations. And I would always tell, and still could tell both of my boys, you got to find what you love. You have, find out what really drives you. What is going to move you to want to put the extra work in that it's going to take, whatever it is, whether it's a sport or not a sport. It doesn't matter to me. And that's how my father was. My father didn't have a baseball background. He was a military dad. And the thing I think about most when I was a kid that I can keep hearing him say was, whatever you're going to do, you're going to work hard at it. He didn't care what I did, as long as I made sure I put my best efforts in. And so for my kids, I tell them that. I tell them about all the breaks that I caught along the way and how lucky I really got to have the career to be able to play professionally, even to begin with, and then to be able to play for as long as I did all around the world. There were a lot of breaks involved, and I try to make them understand that and make sure that they don't put any pressure on themselves. If they love it, go for it. But if you realize it's not your number one passion, don't think that I'm expecting you to do anything with baseball. It's all up to you.
Yeah, I mean, one of your sons, obviously, you mentioned played here in Metro Atlanta, is now in college. Another has played at LakePoint Sports for the Georgia Roadrunners. I mean, baseball continues to be, and especially with what you're doing broadcasting wise and on MLB Network, it continues to be a huge part of your life. How do you go through that process? You mentioned it a little bit there, but of being cognizant of letting them find their own way to baseball without, because obviously you can say, look, you don't have to play, but they're going to hear it from people around them. How do you approach that from saying, I don't want to push you to baseball, but baseball's there if you want it?
Yeah, it's there's a balance in there, right? Of understanding again what it takes. Like, do you like it or do you love it? And I think as I throw some things out at my boys over the years to see how they respond, it gives me a good indicator of how hard I need to push and how thirsty they are to really want to be great. And for my youngest being 13 years old, he doesn't have to be thirsty to be great right now necessarily. It's to keep loving the game. I could probably hit him fly balls and ground balls all day long, and he's got no quit in him. So I know he loves the practice. I know he loves the games. But if you try to push on maybe some of the more advanced stuff, things that I see around the game now, especially on the mental side that weren't around when I was playing, and I try to dive into those topics a little bit and see where they are and see what kind of feedback I get and how interested they are, and really digging in to those kind of next level things. So to me, that's kind of the indicator that I use as I push a little bit or throw some things out there. How do they react? And then it gives me an idea of really what their appetite might be in those spots and how hard I really need to push them or not. I mean, that's the thing I've probably learned more than anything is when to really back off They might not agree. They probably would say that there's opportunities that could have happened earlier. But that's what I learned along the way. And again, I just continue to remind both of them. And now my oldest is done playing, but now with my 13-year-old, that you're not me. I mean, and my wife played softball in college too for 4 years, and she was a Division I athlete and a scholarship athlete. So there's a lot of baseball in our family, and we know the game well. But they need to know that it's got to be their passion first, and you're not out there trying to be either one of us.
Yeah, I know one former big leaguer whose sons have played with my kids who said, and he's been flat with us, like, I don't like to play baseball, but I do it, one, because I'm good at it, and secondarily, everybody expects me to be out there playing baseball, and he kind of feels like he has to. I just imagine that has to be, such a tough situation, one, because you know the skill set's there, but it's like, how do you let the kid, want to be in baseball without everyone outside saying, look, this is your last name, you need to go play baseball.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, because I asked them about that. I don't hear too much about it. I don't know what other people may say to them. But it seems like, at least for both of the boys going through it, that they haven't heard much about it, as far as I know, unless there's other pressures that they don't want to tell me about, whether it's, oh, you have to play, because your dad played, or expectations are higher for you because your dad played, or vice versa, where there's some criticism, oh, your dad wasn't that good. Would that bother them at all? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you get thrown at you. Being a child of a professional athlete, or being in the spotlight, or, having a public job like I do now in the broadcasting side of things. And I tell them all the time, this is the hand that we've been dealt, and we do have to manage it the best that we possibly can. But my expectations for you, no matter what you're doing, is to make sure you're putting your best efforts in all the time. If anything, I have to probably work a little bit harder, at least now with my youngest, to make sure that he's balanced, because he does love the game and loves to play it as much as he does. I forced him, and I usually wouldn't do something like this, but I made him play flag football this last year, just to do something different, to play another sport, to have some other movements. He likes basketball and plays basketball, but the idea of making sure that it doesn't become too baseball centric with everything all the time, especially at a young age, is really important to me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think any of us who have multiple kids, you handle the second kid differently than you did the first one. This is obviously your third kid. Are there elements of that then that maybe you handle it a little bit differently now than you did with the previous two?
Well, it's funny you say that. So my wife always jokes around about the first pancake, right? And trying to figure out exactly getting that first pancake right, and then kind of going from there. My daughter wasn't interested in sports. She danced throughout in middle school and through high school. Now she's in college over at UGA starting this fall. And so we didn't have to deal with it as much with her, but now going through it a second time with my son. I mean, there were definitely some things I think that I learned along the way, but again, going back to trying to read them the best that I possibly can. And understanding, it's interesting too at this age that, parents, they love to coach. They want to be in there, at least ones that, have the passion for it. And I'm the opposite. I actually prefer not to coach unless they need me. Like, if I need some help, I'll make myself available. But my preference would be to really just try to focus on my son only as much as possible. I think with my oldest, I probably wish I would have backed off a year or two earlier from coaching him and let kind of other people take over. And then the focus only has to be on him for me. But I would say that's probably one of the things that sticks out, is be there more for them individually. And if a team needs your help, it's fine. But I would say that he probably likes me not coaching. And we have a nice situation with the Roadrunners right now. So I'm pretty happy with that, as long as they're in good hands. The idea of being able to back off and just focus on your child, and not necessarily out there being that dad that's trying to run everything is certainly an appeal to me. And I think you do get a pretty decent amount of that attitude from a lot of the former pro guys.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've been involved with the Georgia Roadrunners before. Certainly, there can be the flip side of things, though, where you can tell your child something, and everyone says, "Well, you're an endless resource here," but they hear it in a different voice, they hear a different approach, and things may click. I mean, obviously, this happens with pros as well, changes in pitching coaches or whatnot. But is that something you're cognizant of? Maybe they don't need to hear my voice all the time, being the one to tell them how to play.
It's a great point. And that is absolutely one of the things that I learned along the way coaching. And I got to a point, and it's hard. It's easier said than done sometimes. But I may tell one of the other having an active role in a team, hey, do me a favor, go tell Matthew this, or go tell Luke this, because he doesn't want to hear it from me. Because no matter how hard you try, no matter what's going on, you're still dad in that scenario, right? So even though you want to be treated like a coach and given the respect that you would give any coach, it's pretty hard for your child to sit there and look at you as not their father, right? That is my dad. And so that means, especially during the teenage years, maybe an eye roll here, an exhale here, more of that kind of attitude that you might get at home once in a while when they don't like the way that you've talked to them or what you've said to them. So I've tried to the best I possibly can when I was involved on the coaching side to maybe have somebody else tell them something that I might see that I think can help them, at least when we're in uniform. But again, you have to read your child. There are certainly some coaches' kids and former players' kids that are sponges to their parents, and it just works for them. They want to hear as much as they possibly can from their own parents. I have a tendency now at this point, especially since I'm not coaching, to more listen to see if there's questions that are there or throw some things out there that might initiate a conversation and then kind of let him lead after that.
Well, I mean, obviously, because of what you do, it's meant time away. And I think about Nick Markakis when he announced his retirement. He said, "Now my only job is to be dad." Certainly, there can be the ability to be over involved because you've been away. Is that part of it too, that you kind of have to almost keep yourself in check because you did miss out on developmental years, as you might get too over involved in something that, okay, this is where I should be involved.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? The idea of how do you balance that now with the travel that I have and had as a player, and continuing to try to be a really good dad and a good coach, or a coaching dad, I guess you could say, in those spots. I'm the opposite. I'm pretty laid back for the most part. I don't react to when I see things that are going on. I mean, a game ends, and I probably have 5 or 6 things that I saw that I want to bring up where I think there could be room for improvement. But I've challenged myself to make sure that I don't overdo it. Now, my son would probably tell you, no, you still do overdo it a little bit, and there's room for improvement in that area. But it is something that is important that I try to be cognizant of. I'd read, I guess it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, when Mike Matheny had written that letter to parents about coaching your kids and youth baseball and some things that he was seeing that he really didn't like. And I really took it to heart. And the more I'd kind of read on some things like that, reading about the car ride home and how some kids, when they were done playing their amateur years of any sport really, but in this case, baseball, the thing that they dreaded most was the car ride home. Because as a parent, you're sitting there and you're watching, and you may have some ideas of what you saw, whether it's effort level or where your child could have been a little bit better, or something that he or she could have done that would have made the result a little bit better that day. And when the game is over, kids are really good at just kind of putting it behind them. And so I have to be very cognizant of that, especially the times that I'm away. I come back, I watch a game, or I'm watching most of his games on video anyway that my wife will stream for us, and I'll see some things. And more often than not, I'll try to run it by her first. Because she's still kind of protecting her youngest, even though she knows the game, and she may even agree and say, "Hey, you see this where it felt like he wasn't quite ready to, field that ground ball. It looked like he was overthrowing a little bit, and that's why he was up in the zone, because he was more concerned about what the radar gun said." Those are things that are on my mind that I want to say to him right away. And sometimes she'll put me in check and say, "You know what, you need to wait." Or maybe I'll say something to him later, but don't pound him right now, because maybe it was a tough day, or it was a good day and he's feeling really good about the way that the day went. And I'm always like, "Oh, there's an area where you could be better." And that's not the healthiest way to I think, to go through sports. It's the way I kind of went through my career, where I really never gave myself credit for what I did well and constantly beat myself up for what I did bad. And so I'm trying not to do that as a parent. But when you see the game the way I think that people know it really well do, you can't help but want to share all the little details that you think can make your child better.
Yeah, that car ride home thing hits really hard home for me. Having coached my kids in baseball and basketball, I mean, there is that sense of that. I obviously didn't play professional, but I feel like I know the game well enough. You almost have to keep yourself in check, and that's a hard thing to do. Obviously, it also can be.
I would say for parents, like, if you want to throw a little something out there real small, what do you think of the game, how to go, whatever, and then go off of them, see how they react to it. If they want to talk about it, this play happened, that play happened, then there's an opportunity. But if they don't, and it's hard, it's really hard, just let it go. And if they don't want to talk, they don't have to talk, or you want to talk about other stuff or go get ice cream, whatever it may be, that is probably the better path to take.
It can be tough for any athlete to realize when a sport isn't their future. I think sometimes as a parent, we can be guilty of having as hard a time at that as a kid does, and coming to that reality. You mentioned you have one son in college, another inching towards high school. How do you approach that? Just the fact that baseball may or may not be in your son's future.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. I want them to be happy. I really care about, their own mental health, what they're working towards, what they're passionate about. And even if it means going to figure that out, right? We see how many times in college that so many of us end up taking different turns because of how our experiences go, or a class that we like. And I wasn't going to do this. Now I want to do this and chase this. And I just want them to be happy and be fulfilled in life. And whatever role sports may or may not play in that, it really doesn't matter to me at all. And I've tried to tell them that as much as possible. Just because I love something doesn't mean you need to love it. It does. Just because this has been my entire life doesn't mean it needs to be your life. whether it means playing or at this point in the game, even broadcasting, right? I've thrown that out at my kids as well and try to show them behind the scenes and how things work on both the radio and television side. And here's how production works. And there's lots of roles, obviously, in television for people that didn't play the game. Is there any interest there? And so whatever it may be, whatever I've done, I try to share with them. And if there's no interest or it's not a passion of theirs, I am 100% fine with that. I care more about their well-being, their happiness, our relationship. And if that includes baseball, great. And if it doesn't, that's great too.
That's a great message. But for the parents who may be listening, they have children in any sport. What's your advice for someone who has reached the top level of their sport when it comes to raising an athlete?
Yeah, it's a good one, right? I think everyone is a little bit different. I think you have to do your best to read your child, and you have to try to be objective about it, which again is really easier said than done. But if you had done something really good in the game, keep an eye on them, find out if it's their passion or not. And you should be able to tell. You've been around enough coaches in your career where you get a feel for who's in and who's not, right? When I sit there and when I was coaching, there were certain kids that I could tell loved the game. Wanted to play the game. Those kids we could push a little bit harder when they were younger. And there was kids that just like being out there. It was a little bit more social for them. Their parents wanted them there just because they were doing an activity. I wouldn't push that kid as hard. I think that's important to kind of take that same approach as a parent. There's no reason to be extra critical of a child who seems like he maybe likes the sport that you're coaching, but doesn't love it. I just don't see the upside in that. There's some value in the discipline that you get with sports and being a team player and understanding that there's work that needs to be done. But if you can realize that your child is not necessarily overly passionate about a sport, let them do their thing. Let them be happy. I think that, again, I go back to what my dad told me for years, and I think it's the right message, is that whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to work hard at it. I don't care what it is. And then you'll see the rewards of your hard work, and you'll get where you want to go. So I would say don't push them into something that they don't want to be in. If you don't see the passion there, because I think then they're going to end up resenting you for it, and nobody wants that later in life.
Well, you can find CJ on Twitter at CJ Nitkowski on Texas Rangers broadcast. And of course, you can hear him on MLB Network Radio. CJ, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And early happy Father's Day to you.
Yeah, early happy Father's Day to you. Thanks for having me, Corey.